for July 1 Town Council work session. Mr. T. Walt, first item on the agenda. You have some very distinguished guests here this evening.
I do.
I thought I would turn it over to you to have you introduce them.
Well, I can only introduce the one,
Okay.
for sure. Tonight we have Larry Johnson, who represents the Revolutionary War and the American Revolution, and he's here to talk to us about a plaque about Joseph Warren, and wants to know if we would entertain possibly of a place it within in the foyer of the town hall. So would you go up here and you can introduce the other two gentlemen with. Where's Buddy? I know you, and I want to make sure that he does the right thing.
Well, tonight my name is Abel Johnston, and I'm over 250 years old. Abel Johnston was my great-great-great-great-grandfather who fought in the American Revolution, and I started some years ago portraying him and telling the story, his story in the war. He began as a militiaman down in North Carolina, and he was Abel Johnston from Johnston County. Does that make sense to you?
That's right.
Yep. And he never had a uniform. He never was issued a musket. He never was issued powder. He was never issued any balls. But he fought for American freedom, along with other members of my family. And so for some years, this is what I've been doing. But before I go on any further, I'd like to introduce two soldiers with me. First, I'd like to introduce Dale Carpenter. And Dale is also a member of the Sons of the American Revolution. And Ned Fahrenholtz, who is also a member of the Sons of the American Revolution. And coincidentally, each of us are veterans, so we know something about where our grandfathers came. I don't think we carried muskets. I understand you're in the Marine Corps.
Yes, sir.
What did you carry?
M14.
You were in there long before I was. M1.
And M1 to carry on.
Okay. Right. So we're honored that we have this opportunity to come and speak to you and represent someone very important in American history. In 1836, this county was formed. It was formed from a number of counties in this area because the people here decided they had been too isolated and they needed their own county. So the question came to me when I moved here some 20 years ago as to why was this county named Warren County? But I didn't pursue it at the time. I just sort of thought about it and then began to just sort of forget about it. But then several years ago, as I began to talk about the history of the American Revolution, I began to think about, well, why is this county named Warren? Why is there also an avenue over here that leads right into the county administration building by the post office, also named Warren? Well, I didn't know, but after a while I decided I would ask all my neighbors. I asked my neighbors, guess what? I already call you mayor or your honor or your
Any of the above's fine.
Are you?
Matt's fine.
What?
Matt's fine.
Okay, good.
Call me Matt.
So I began to ask anybody that I could find that would want to talk to me about why the county was named Warren. I don't think I found a single citizen in the county that could tell me why the county was named Warren. So as I began to do my research, I found out that it was named for Joseph Warren, one of the greatest martyrs of the American Revolution. I won't embarrass you since you all have heard of Joseph Warren. You probably have, but if you haven't, just a little bit about him, and I don't intend to keep you very long because I have a feeling you've got a long agenda. But as I began to do my research on Joseph Warren, he was a doctor that was killed at Bunker Hill at age 34. Well, what did that mean? Did that mean anything? It didn't mean a lot to me at the time. But as I began to read his history and who Joseph Warren truly was, he was an American patriot. He began to resist English rule, domination by a tyrant, when the Stamp Act was passed. He joined with 8 other men. And it's a little bit complicated to go into who the 8 were, but if we named them, you would know some of them, Samuel Adams, John Adams, and other men. He joined with them to resist English rule because we as a people were being punished, we were being beaten, We were caused to pay taxes, which we had no money to pay because the government had outlawed our money. How are you going to do that? Ask a man to pay taxes and then outlaw the money? Huh? Going to do that? And then, of course, they didn't bring enough money into the colonies for us to have enough hard currency to even pay our bills. So those were just little things that began to grate on the nerves of the people. If you did not pay your taxes, for example, or you spoke out against paying tax, ever spoke out against paying tax of some kind in your whole life? Raise your hand if you have not. Well, a hand has been. What about press? No one. In those days, during the colonial times, if you suggested that you not pay your taxes, you would be put in a headlock. The county doesn't have one here, the city does. But you know what that is? Head, hands, and you might be put there for 10 days or 30 days. Once you had completed that sentence, as you were released from that, both ears would be cut off to remind people that you had spoke out against the king. If you happened to own a horse, both of the horse's ears would be cut off and the tail. That's the type of abuse that our people were resisting in those days. And it was a just cause. Well, one of the men that resisted that was a young doctor. Very smart young man, Joseph Warren, who entered Harvard University at the age of 14. Age of 14. Where are our kids today? Where are my grandchildren today? They're not entering Harvard at age 14. They're probably home on a cell phone someplace playing a game. But he entered Harvard at age 14. But at age 22, he had graduated as a physician, a well-known physician. But he saw the abuse in Boston, the heart and the place of all the abuse that was taking place in the colonies at that time. He saw it because he had to doctor people that were being abused, who were being beaten, who were being shot, whose bones were being broken, whose children were being shot, because sometimes children would go before the governor's office and protest that their families had no money. And on one occasion, the royal governor fired into a crowd of children, 11 and 12 years old. And the first person to die for American freedom was an 11-year-old child named Christopher Sider. You ever hear that in history?
Oh, sir.
Look it up. The first person to die was an 11-year-old child. The second person to die was a man who had been a slave and had worked for his freedom. And he resisted taxes. He resisted the redcoats. He resisted the governor. And so when they went to Boston Square and they protested, the English fired into a crowd. And the next person to die, the first adult to die, was Crispus Atticus, a former slave. Those are the kinds of history lessons that I hope our public schools will begin to tell. And I hope that you will accept our invitation to join in the education of the citizens of this county about who this man, Joseph Warren, was. When the war began to start, Joseph's wife died, left him with 4 children, so he was a widower. But it didn't stop him from resisting English rule. He continued to fight, but he continued to practice his medicine as well. Smallpox was a great epidemic throughout the colonies. During the Revolutionary War period, we lost at least 130,000 people to smallpox. We lost 5,000 in Philadelphia. We lost another 6,000 in Boston. And so this young doctor was coming up with ways, discovering ways to resist smallpox and begin to perfect how to inoculate people against smallpox. As a matter of fact, Abigail Adams had her children inoculated by Joseph Warren. So this is the type of man that we have come here to remind you of tonight, and the man for whom this county is named. I've been asked the question. I'm a Southerner. I'm from Johnston County, North Carolina. And people have asked me, says, well, why are you so working so hard for this man who was born and raised in Boston? I says, because more than a Southerner, more than a Northerner, more than an Easterner, I am an American, and I believe in American freedom. Why was this man's name used to label this county? I don't know if anybody has that history. I hope someday I'll have time enough to go and research the minutes that goes back to 1836 and truly discover what was in the minds of your predecessors, the leaders of this county, when they decided to name this county after, as someone said, a Yankee doctor Why would a southern county do that? Here's what I think. The Sons of the American Revolution has a project going on at this point. We are searching all of the old graveyards. All of the old graves. If you know of old graveyards, please tell us. We want to find out who is buried there, and if we can find the names of Revolutionary War soldiers. Okay? Is that a deal?
Deal.
You'll let me know. You'll let us know where they are. But we're beginning to find them all around on these hills around Front Royal. There's a graveyard at Randolph-Macon. Did you know that?
Yes, sir.
Up on the hill, there's a Revolutionary War soldier buried there. There's soldiers buried down at what is now Bentonville. There's soldiers buried over here. Dale, you got to tell me, I can never name Shady Lane, Lady Shady.
Oh, Mary Shady Lane.
Mary Shady Lane. Thank you very much. I'm 81 years old. I have a right to forget a few things. Right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Aye, aye, sir.
Aye, aye.
Aye, aye. Recently, about a year ago, unbeknownst to me, somebody says, what about that graveyard? It's going to have houses built all around it up on top of a hill over here. Right? It's going to have houses. How many houses in there, Mayor?
Too many.
We'll have a lot.
Yeah.
A bunch. And so up on the top of that hill, do you know whose graveyard that is? Do you know whose? Press, you're smart. Press. Journalist, you're supposed to go to school. No, you listen. All right, is that a journalist on it? Please pay attention. Just pulling your leg, guys.
Oh, I'm listening.
Over there on top of that hill is the Marshall Cemetery. Did you know that? It's the Marshall Cemetery. And who's buried there? James Marshall, the brother of John. Who was John? Who was John? Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Initiated our first important rulings. But John is not buried there. Where is he buried? In the great wisdom of our government, they decided he wouldn't be buried in a common place, like a hill on top of some place in a lost, forsaken place called Front Royal. No, he would be buried at Arlington. So he's not there. But his brothers are. There's James, who fought all through the war, was at Valley Forge. He was in most of the battles with Washington. And so we've marked his grave on top of that hill that overlooks this entire. It ought to be a shrine. Is that inside city limits?
I believe it is.
Is it? Is it inside city limits?
What is it?
Yeah. Yeah, let's do something over there.
Be great.
Let's make it a place where people will know where their heroes are, where the people were that fought at Valley Forge. How many people died at Valley Forge? Got any idea? Washington went in with 11,000 troops. 3,000 of his men starved to death. Did y'all know that? 3,000. Do you know the average age of his army that was there? Probably not. His average age of his army was between 11 and 16 years old. You got children. Go home and tell them. Go home and tell them that people that fought for our freedom were kids just like you. That's the story I'm trying to tell. And I know I'm going on too long. I know I'm going on too long because you've got important business here. But now what do we have here? Ned, step up. Now Ned has been the plaque bearer for
Found a job I could handle.
for 9 public schools, the library, where else? The Historical Society, and there's going to be other places. But this is the plaque that the Sons of the American Revolution has paid for, co-designed by Doug Stanley's office, not Doug. I don't know if Doug's an artist or not. But anyway, by artists. An artist did that. You know, somebody paid to draw. You know, very special. And so here is the plaque. Dr. Joseph Warren, namesake of Warren County, Virginia, established in 1836. Now what I think is this. When this county was divided off and they decided it would be one county, not 3 or 4, one. I'm going to bet you there were some old soldiers that were still living Oh, they'd been really old, wouldn't they? 85, 90 years old. Or maybe it was their children. And they said, who do you want the county name for? We want our county name for the greatest martyr. Maybe some of them fought with Joseph. I don't know. Maybe Joseph treated some of them for smallpox. I don't know. But in their wisdom, these southern men fighting in the Revolution said, our county will be named for the most important martyr of the American Revolution. Press, hold your hand up so I can tell who you are. They're not going to do it. I want you to write that down. I want you to write that down, that this county was named for the most important martyr in the American Revolution. Why was he important? All the things I've told you, plus other things. He wrote the Suffolk Resolves, which went on to become the basis for the Declaration of Independence. But he was dead before that declaration was passed. He died 17 June 1775. He died 2 days after he had been made a major general, a doctor with no military experience. But the people thought so much of him. But when he went into Bunker Hill, 2 of the men that had organized the troops are ready for an attack by the British. Said, Joseph, you've just been made a general. You should take over and you should direct the battle. And no, he said, the physician in him said, no, I will go into the front lines and I will fight with the men. And I'll be in the trenches with them. You take care of the battle. Joseph had written so many things that the king had heard about him and called him the first treasonous in this country. And the word had gone out to General Gage, the governor in charge of the British forces in Massachusetts, says, whatever you do, get Warren. Whatever you do, kill Warren. Warren is worth 500 men in a regiment. Kill it. So the battle took place. The first wave, we resisted. The second wave, we resisted. We ran out of powder. We ran out of musket balls. And the British general said, we know we now can win. They were losing the war. The British were losing that battle. They had lost 1,000 men, 1/3 of their army. We had lost 400. They did not give up. When our men had enough powder but no balls, they fired rocks from the cannons. The general knew it was over. The final attack. Joseph knew it was over. Joseph said, men, retreat. I and a few other men will stay in the trench, and we will provide a rear guard action. A lieutenant, British officer, Lord Rawdon, had heard, get Warren, and he saw Joseph. Joseph had been bayoneted. Joseph had been shot. He was kneeling in a trench. He was now helpless, a wounded soldier. And so he went up and shot him in the face and killed him dead. Right through the cheek, out the back of his head. General Gage said, when you kill him, mutilate his body. He will not be a martyr. Mutilate it. They bayoneted a corpse. They stomped on a corpse. They stomped him. They stomped him. They buried him in a 2-foot grave along with a couple of other soldiers. 2 days later, they came back. And they so hated Joseph, they dug him up. They mutilated him again. They spit on his corpse. They jumped up and down on his body. They bayoneted it again. And then the lieutenant says, cut his head off. They separated his head from his body and they buried it. It took 10 months for Paul Revere, his dear friend, and his mother and his brothers to find the body. It took 10 months. And they said, what are you going to do? How are we going to identify this old corpse? And Paul says, I can identify it at dental work. Who's the dentist as well as Superman? If it's Joseph's head, I can identify my dental work. His mother was there, heartbroken. And she says, if it's his body, and they left his vest on, I can identify the vest that I made for him and that he wore in the back.
pull the dirt away. There's his mother, looking at a headless body, and says, "That's my son." Now what we're doing here, and I know you're getting anxious, I can tell. The mayor starts sitting on the edge of their seat. We want to offer you an opportunity to receive this most historic plaque on the American Revolution under this condition, that it will hang in the most prominent position that you can determine. Is that an agreement?
Sounds fair.
That this martyr
Be an honor.
will be recognized in this county. And now the children of Warren County are beginning to tell me when they see me, they'll say, "You're Liberty Man." I know, that's my nickname, Liberty Man. My grandfather was known as a Liberty Man. "You're Liberty Man." I know Joseph.
That's great.
4th and 5th graders saying, "I know Joseph." So if you agree to that, here's what we're going to do. If you agree to it tonight, I will give this plaque to whoever takes charge of it, with the condition that you will mount it on that wall where it's going to be, and then allow us to come back with a full honor guard, Revolutionary War reenactors just like us, and we will dedicate this to the county and in memory of Joseph Warren.
That's great.
Does any man here have anything else to say? Dale?
No, I think you said it all, Larry. It's just probably, I just add one thing. It's hard to imagine today, but Warren was so popular, if he had lived, he would have probably, a good shot, he would have been our first president. He was that renowned in Boston, and we don't remember that name today. And a year ago, when Larry asked me that question, I had the same look on my face, pretending I knew who Joseph Warren was. I knew what the name was. But in the past year, Larry's really brought it to life, and this guy's history is memorable, and it's well worth celebrating.
Abigail said when John came home, and John Adams came home and told his wife Abigail that Joseph is dead, she wept. It was her family doctor. And in her tears, she said this: "Joseph would have been our president." God bless everybody.
Mr. Johnston, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
They can keep it, but if they decide, wait a minute, he's taking
Yeah.
it. I don't know what, y'all have to have a big vote on things here?
We're gonna.
Well, when it gets mounted now, you call us back so all these guys like me can come back over here. And if you allow it, we may fire a musket, but if it's inside, maybe not. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
God bless everybody.
Thank you.
God bless you.